The text message arrived at 2:47 a.m. Your daughter is beautiful. She reminds me of someone I used to know. Sarah stared at her phone, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The blue glow of the screen burned her eyes in the darkness of her bedroom. Wrong number? It had to be. But then she saw the photo attached. Emma. Her 14-year-old daughter, walking home from school yesterday, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, completely unaware that someone was watching. Someone was close enough to capture the small mole on her left cheek, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. Someone had been watching. Sarah's hands trembled as she screenshot the message, her nursing training kicking in even through the panic. Document everything. Evidence matters. But evidence of what, exactly? The number was local, but she didn't recognize it. The photo was taken from across the street, just outside Miller's hardware store. The same route Emma took every day after school. She wanted to wake Emma, to shake her gently, and ask if she'd noticed anyone following her. But what would she say? How do you explain to a 14-year-old that monsters don't always live under the bed, sometimes they live 3 houses down? Because that's exactly where the photo was taken from. The angle, the perspective, the familiar green awning of Miller's in the background. Sarah had walked that route herself countless times. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every tree that provided shade. And she knew there was only one house with a clear view of that exact spot. The house where David Martinez had moved in 3 months ago. Perfect timing, really. Right after Emma started walking home alone from school. Right after Sarah's divorce was finalized and she'd started working double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital. Right after she'd become the kind of mother she'd sworn she'd never be. Distracted, exhausted, trusting strangers because she had no choice. David had seemed like a godsend. The kind of neighbor you read about in feel-good magazines but never actually encounter in real life. He'd introduced himself the day after moving in, showing up at her door with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and an easy smile. Just being neighborly, he'd said, his voice warm and reassuring. I know how hard it can be settling into a new place. Figured I'd start by meeting the folks next door. He was handsome, in an approachable way. Salt and pepper hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of man who looked like he'd coached Little League and knew how to fix a leaky faucet. Everything about him screamed, safe, reliable, trustworthy. Maybe that should have been her first red flag. In the weeks that followed, David had been nothing but helpful. He'd offered to bring in her garbage cans when she worked late shifts, fix their fence without being asked after a storm knocked down a section, shoveled their walkway during the February blizzard. He'd even helped Emma with her bike when the chain came off, his patient voice drifting through the kitchen window as he explained how to properly oil the gears. He's really nice, Mom, Emma had said that evening, her face lighting up in a way it rarely did since the divorce. He said, I remind him of his niece back in Phoenix. Sarah had smiled then, grateful for any positive male influence in Emma's life. Her ex-husband Derek had been many things, but a role model wasn't one of them. The idea that someone kind and stable had moved into their neighborhood felt like a gift. But gifts, Sarah was learning, sometimes came with strings attached. Now, staring at the message on her phone, she felt those strings tightening around her chest. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. What kind of person sent photos of teenage girls in the middle of the night? What kind of person had photos of teenage girls on their phone at all? She deleted the message, then immediately regretted it. Evidence. She needed evidence. But when she checked her deleted messages, it was gone. Completely gone, as if it had never existed. Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. She padded to Emma's room and cracked the door open. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, dark hair spread across her pillow, one arm hanging over the edge of the bed. 14 years old. Still young enough to sleep with her childhood stuffed elephant, but old enough to walk home alone. Old enough to catch the attention of someone who shouldn't be looking. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood. She made coffee with shaking hands, burning her tongue on the first sip. Emma bounced into the kitchen, all energy and optimism, chattering about a history test she was confident she'd aced. Morning, sunshine, Sarah managed, forcing normalcy into her voice. Sleep well? Like a rock. Oh, and Mom? Mr. David said he has more of those cookies I like. The ones with the white chocolate chips? He's gonna bring them over later. Sarah's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. When did you talk to Mr. David? Yesterday. When I was walking home. He was in his garden and waved me over. He's really sweet, Mom. He asked about school and stuff. Said he used to be a teacher before he retired. A teacher? Sarah filed that information away, something nagging at her about it. What did he want to know about school? Emma shrugged, already distracted by her phone. Just normal stuff. What subjects I like, if I have any trouble with homework. He offered to help if I ever needed, especially with math. Said he specialized in working with kids my age. The words hit Sarah like ice water. Kids my age. She'd heard those words before, in training sessions at the hospital, in news reports, in testimonies from survivors. It was textbook grooming behavior. Establishing trust, positioning himself as helpful, showing special interest in a child's education. Emma, Sarah said carefully, I don't think you should go to Mr. David's house. For homework, help, or anything else. Why not? Emma's brow furrowed. He's just being nice, and I could use help with algebra. How do you explain intuition to a teenager? How do you justify fear when you have no proof? Sarah chose her words carefully. I just think it's better if you get help from your teachers or tutors at school. I don't really know Mr. David well enough yet. Emma rolled her eyes. Mom, he lives 3 houses down. Mrs. Henderson likes him. Even cranky Mr. Peterson waves at him. He's not some stranger. But he was, Sarah realized. He was exactly that. A stranger who'd moved in and immediately begun collecting information about her daughter. The cookies, the helpful gestures, the interest in Emma's education, it all felt calculated now, like pieces of a puzzle she was just beginning to see. After Emma left for school, Sarah found herself drawn to the front window. David's house looked innocent enough in the morning light. A modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a well-maintained garden. American flags hung from the porch, and a welcome mat sat cheerfully by the front door. It was the picture of suburban normalcy. But Sarah noticed things she'd missed before. The way David's bedroom window had a direct view of Emma's room. The strategic placement of the garden bench that offered a clear sightline to the bus stop. The fact that his garbage cans were always perfectly positioned to give him a reason to be outside when the school bus arrived. At 8:15 a.m., right on schedule, David appeared in his garden. He looked up at Sarah's window and waved, his smile broad and friendly. She waved back automatically, then immediately felt sick. Was she being paranoid? Or was she finally seeing what had been there all along? Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door that afternoon, her white hair perfectly coiffed despite the wind. At 78, she was the unofficial neighborhood watch, a woman who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. Sarah, dear, she said, accepting the offered cup of tea. I wanted to talk to you about that new man. David. Sarah's pulse quickened. What about him? Well, I don't want to be a gossip, but Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice conspiratorially. He's been taking pictures of the street, he says. Claims he's documenting the neighborhood for some sort of historical project. Pictures of what exactly? That's just it, dear. His camera's always pointed at your house, and he's got one of those big telephoto lenses, the kind the photographers use at sporting events. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. I asked him about it yesterday, and he got all flustered. Said he was just interested in the architecture of the older homes. Sarah's mouth went dry. Mrs. Henderson, have you seen him talking to Emma? Oh, yes. Quite often. Sweet girl, that Emma. But Sarah. The older woman's expression grew serious. I raised 4 daughters. I know when a man pays too much attention to a young girl, and that man watches Emma like a hawk. That evening, Sarah sat Emma down for a conversation she'd been dreading. Sweetheart, I need to ask you something important. Has Mr. David ever made you feel uncomfortable? Ever said anything that seemed strange? Emma looked genuinely confused. No, Mom, he's just friendly. Why? Did something happen? I'm just being cautious. Has he ever asked you personal questions? About your schedule, your friends, your activities? I guess. I mean, he knows I have soccer practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he asked about my part-time job at the ice cream shop. But that's just normal conversation, right? Sarah's blood chilled. Emma's job at Scoops and Swirls was new. She'd only started 2 weeks ago. How did David know about it? More importantly, why was he tracking her daughter's schedule so closely? Emma, I need you to promise me something. Don't go anywhere alone with Mr. David. Don't accept rides from him. And if he ever makes you feel uncomfortable, even a little bit, you tell me immediately. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. I just want you to be safe, baby. Promise me. I promise, Emma whispered, and Sarah hoped it would be enough. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She found herself at the window again, watching David's house. A soft glow emanated from his upstairs window, the one that faced Emma's room. As she watched, a shadow moved across the curtain. Someone was awake, someone was watching. The next morning brought another shock. Emma came downstairs wearing a delicate silver bracelet Sarah had never seen before. That's pretty, Sarah said, keeping her voice casual. Where did you get it? Mr. David gave it to me yesterday. He said it reminded him of me, because I'm mature for my age. Emma beamed, clearly pleased by the compliment. He said most kids my age aren't as responsible and thoughtful as I am. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Mature for my age, the predator's calling card. She'd heard it in training sessions at the hospital, in documentaries about child abuse, in the testimonies of survivors. It was textbook grooming behavior, designed to make a child feel special and adult-like. Emma, Sarah said carefully, I need you to give me that bracelet. Why? Emma's face fell. It was a gift. He was just being nice. Adults don't give jewelry to children who aren't family members. It's not appropriate. But Mom, no buts. Give me the bracelet. Now, Emma reluctantly removed it, her eyes filling with tears. You're being mean. Mr. David is the first person who's been nice to me since Dad left. He listens to me. He cares about what I have to say. Sarah's heart broke at the hurt in her daughter's voice, but she also felt a surge of protective fury. David had deliberately targeted Emma's vulnerabilities, her loneliness after the divorce, her need for male attention, her desire to feel mature and important. He'd studied her daughter, like a predator studies prey. After Emma left for school, Sarah made a decision. She called the non-emergency line for the police. I'd like to report suspicious behavior, she told the dispatcher. I think someone might be targeting my daughter. The officer who took her statement was professional but skeptical. Ma'am, has this person made any threats? Has he touched your daughter inappropriately? No, but has he attempted to lure her somewhere? Asked her to keep secrets? Sarah felt her frustration mounting. Not exactly, but he's been watching her. Taking pictures. He knows her schedule. He gave her jewelry. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but being friendly with neighbors isn't illegal. Unless he's committed a crime or made specific threats, there's not much we can do. So I have to wait until he hurts her? I'm not saying that, but we need evidence of actual criminal behavior. I'd suggest documenting any interactions, keeping a log of suspicious activities. If the situation escalates, call us immediately. Sarah hung up feeling more alone than ever. The system designed to protect children required them to be victimized first. Prevention wasn't enough. They needed proof of harm. But Sarah was a mother, and mothers don't wait for permission to protect their children. She spent the rest of the day researching David Martinez. What she found, or rather, what she didn't find, was alarming. His online presence was minimal. A Facebook profile created 3 months ago, right when he'd moved in. A LinkedIn account with vague employment history. No tagged photos. No comments from friends. No digital footprint before his arrival in their neighborhood. Sarah called the Phoenix area code she'd found in his sparse social media. Hi, I'm calling to verify employment history for David Martinez. He claims to have been a teacher there. The school district's HR department was helpful but delivered troubling news. Ma'am, we have no record of a David Martinez in our system. Not as a teacher, substitute, or support staff. Are you sure about the name? Sarah's hands shook as she hung up. If David hadn't been a teacher, why lie? And why specifically offer to help with homework? She tried a different approach, calling the Phoenix Police Department. I'm trying to verify someone's background. David Martinez, age 45, claims to have lived in your area recently. The officer was professional, but limited in what he could share. Ma'am, I can't give out personal information, but I can tell you that we have no record of a David Martinez matching that description in our system as a victim, witness, or person of interest. No record, no history. David Martinez had appeared in their neighborhood like a ghost, with no past and no verifiable identity. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called in sick to work and arranged for Emma to stay overnight at her best friend's house. If David was targeting her daughter, she needed to know what happened when Emma wasn't around. The next day, Sarah positioned herself at her living room window with a cup of coffee and her phone. At 3:15 p.m., Emma's usual arrival time, David emerged from his house. He walked to the end of his driveway and stood there, clearly waiting. 3:20 p.m. David checked his watch, looked up the street. 3:25 p.m. He walked a few steps toward the bus stop, then back to his driveway. 3:30 p.m. David pulled out his phone, seemed to check something, then walked directly to Sarah's front door. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched him approach. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. She activated the voice recorder on her phone and opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, David," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Looking for someone?" He startled, clearly not expecting her to be home. "Oh, Sarah, I noticed Emma didn't come home at her usual time. I wanted to make sure everything was okay." "Funny thing," Sarah said, stepping onto her porch and closing the door behind her. "How do you know Emma's usual time? Do you watch for her every day?" David's smile flickered, just for a moment, before returning to its practiced warmth. "I just happened to notice. I'm usually in my garden around that time. Is she all right?" "She's fine. She's at a friend's house." "But David, I need to ask you something." Sarah held up her phone, making sure he could see she was recording. "I called Phoenix. You were never a teacher there." The change in David's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warm, neighborly mask slipped just enough to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice still pleasant but with an edge Sarah had never heard before. "The only misunderstanding," Sarah replied, "is you thinking I wouldn't protect my daughter." David's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Sarah. I've been nothing but kind to you and Emma. I've helped you, been a good neighbor. You've been watching my daughter, taking pictures, learning her schedule. You gave her jewelry and told her she was mature for her age. That's not being a good neighbor, David. That's called grooming." For a moment, David said nothing. Then, slowly, his smile returned. But this time, it was different. Predatory. "You have quite an imagination, Sarah. But I suppose that's what happens when you work too many night shifts. Stress can make people paranoid." "The police are already involved," Sarah lied smoothly. "They're very interested in your photography hobby. And your real name." Something flickered in David's eyes. "Fear? Anger? I don't know what you think you know, but I know enough." Sarah's voice was steel. "Stay away from my daughter, David, or whoever you really are. If I see you near her, if I catch you watching our house, if you so much as look in her direction, I will make your life a living hell." David stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw the mask slip completely. The man looking back at her was nothing like the friendly neighbor who'd brought cookies and offered help. This man was cold, calculating, and very, very dangerous. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. A big mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you in the first place." Without another word, David turned and walked back to his house. Sarah watched him go, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. She'd played her hand, and now she could only hope it was enough. But as she watched David disappear into his house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Men like David didn't just give up. They adapted. They waited. They found new ways to get what they wanted. And what David wanted was her daughter. That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow at the window made her heart race. She'd installed new locks on all the doors and windows, but locks were only as good as the person trying to break them. At 3 a.m., she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. A car door closing. Soft footsteps on gravel. Someone was outside. Sarah grabbed her phone and crept to the window. David's house was dark, but she could see a figure moving in the shadows by her mailbox. As she watched, the figure bent down and placed something underneath. Sarah waited until the figure disappeared before creeping outside. Under the mailbox, she found a manila envelope with her name written in block letters. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Emma walking to school, Emma at the ice cream shop, Emma in her bedroom, taken with a telephoto lens through her window. Each photo was dated and time-stamped, going back 3 months. At the bottom of the envelope was a note. "She really is beautiful. It would be a shame if something happened to her. Some things are bigger than protective mothers. Some people have friends. Consider this a warning." Sarah's hands shook as she read the note again. This wasn't just about David anymore. He had accomplices, a network, and they were threatening her daughter. She called 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" "Someone is threatening my daughter. I have photographs, evidence of stalking. I need help." The police arrived within minutes, but by then, David's house was empty, cleared out completely, as if he'd never been there at all. The only sign of his presence was the dead garden where he'd pretended to work while watching Emma. Detective Martinez, no relation, he assured Sarah, was thorough and professional. He documented the photographs, took Sarah's statement, and ran David's information through various databases. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, using Sarah's married name, "I need to tell you something. The man you knew as David Martinez doesn't exist. Those fingerprints we lifted from the envelope? They belong to someone named Marcus Webb. He's a registered sex offender with a history of targeting teenage girls." Sarah's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, the full weight of what had almost happened hitting her like a physical blow. How long? How long has he been watching her? Based on the timestamps on these photos, at least 3 months. Maybe longer. "Mrs. Peterson, your daughter was in serious danger. If you hadn't acted when you did," the detective didn't need to finish. Sarah understood. Emma had been targeted by a predator who'd done this before, who'd perfected his methods, learned how to blend in, how to gain trust, how to isolate victims. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked. "Gone. But we've issued a BOLO alert. His description and known aliases are being circulated to law enforcement agencies nationwide. If he surfaces again, we'll get him." But Sarah knew the truth. Men like Marcus Webb didn't just disappear. They moved on, found new neighborhoods, new targets. Some other mother, some other daughter would face what Sarah had faced. The thought made her sick. 3 weeks later, Sarah was folding laundry when Emma came into the kitchen with a troubled expression. "Mom, I need to tell you something. About Mr. David." Sarah set down the towel she'd been folding. "What about him, sweetheart?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about being mature for my age. And I remembered something." Emma sat down across from her mother. "He used to ask me weird questions. About boys at school, about whether I had a boyfriend. He said I was too pretty to be single." Sarah's heart ached for her daughter. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I thought it was normal. I thought he was just being friendly. But now," Emma's voice trailed off, "now I realize it wasn't normal, was it?" "No, baby. It wasn't." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Mom, was he going to hurt me? Sarah chose her words carefully. I think he was going to try. But you're safe now, and you're going to stay safe. How do you know? Because I'm your mother, and protecting you is my job. The most important job I'll ever have. Emma nodded, then surprised Sarah by reaching across the table and taking her hand. I'm glad you were watching, Mom. I'm glad you were brave enough to act. I'm glad too, baby. I'm glad too. That night, Sarah sat in her living room, looking out at the empty house where David Markashad lived. The for sale sign in the front yard swayed gently in the evening breeze. Soon, a new family would move in. Maybe a young couple, maybe retirees, maybe another single mother looking for a fresh start. Sarah hoped they'd be safe. She hoped they'd be vigilant. She hoped they'd trust their instincts if something felt wrong. Because the truth was, Marcus Webb was still out there. And he wasn't the only one. According to the statistics Detective Martinez had shared, there were over 750,000 registered sex offenders in the United States. But registration was only required after conviction. How many more were out there, undetected, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, perfecting their techniques? Sarah thought about the mothers who might be facing what she'd faced. The ones who noticed something wrong but talked themselves out of it. The ones who worried about seeming paranoid or overprotective. The ones who trusted too easily because they wanted to believe in the goodness of people. She thought about Emma, sleeping safely upstairs, and all the other Emmas out there. The bright, curious, trusting children who deserved to grow up without fear, without having to learn that monsters looked like ordinary neighbors. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She started a blog, sharing her story anonymously. She called it The Perfect Neighbor and wrote about the warning signs she'd missed, the red flags she'd ignored, the moment she'd finally trusted her instincts. Within days, the blog had dozens of comments from other mothers, sharing their own experiences. Some had acted on their suspicions and discovered they were right. Others had ignored their instincts and lived to regret it. Sarah realized she'd stumbled onto something important. A community of parents who understood that vigilance wasn't paranoia, that asking questions wasn't rude, that protecting children required constant awareness. The blog grew. Local news stations picked up the story. Sarah did interviews, always with her face obscured, always using a pseudonym. She wasn't interested in fame or attention. She was interested in prevention. Because for every Marcus Webb who got caught, there were dozens who didn't. For every Emma who stayed safe, there were others who weren't so lucky. 6 months later, Sarah received an email that made her cry. It was from a mother in Oregon who'd read the blog and recognized similar behavior in her own neighbor. She'd acted on her suspicions, called police, and discovered that the man had been taking photos of children at a local playground. Your story gave me the courage to trust my instincts, the mother wrote. You probably saved my daughter's life. Sarah printed the email and kept it in her desk drawer. On the hard days, when she wondered if she'd overreacted, when she questioned whether David had really been a threat, she'd read it again. Because the truth was, she'd never know for certain what Marcus Webb's ultimate plans had been. She'd never know if he would have escalated from watching to touching to taking. She'd acted on instinct, on fear, on a mother's primal need to protect her child. And that was enough. Emma was now 15, taller and more confident than she'd been a year ago. She'd started dating a boy from her chemistry class, a sweet kid named Jake, who always shook Sarah's hand and made eye contact when he spoke to her. Emma had learned to trust her instincts too, to speak up when something felt wrong. The house where Marcus had lived was occupied by a retired couple now, the Johnsons. They were kind, quiet people who waved from their garden and brought soup when Sarah had the flu. They were exactly what good neighbors should be, present but not intrusive, helpful but not overly interested in Emma's schedule. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would look out at their house and remember the fear she'd felt watching David's window, the way her stomach had clenched when she'd seen him waiting for Emma, the moment she'd realized that evil could wear a friendly face and carry a plate of cookies. But she didn't dwell on the fear. Instead, she focused on the strength she'd found in herself, the courage she'd summoned when it mattered most. She'd protected her daughter, and in doing so, she'd found her voice. The blog continued to grow. Sarah had started a podcast, a support group for parents, a resource center for recognizing signs of predatory behavior. She turned her worst nightmare into something useful, something that might prevent other families from going through what she'd experienced. But the most important thing was Emma. Happy, healthy, safe Emma, who trusted her mother's judgment and knew she was loved unconditionally. The girl who'd come so close to danger, but had been protected by a mother's vigilance and intuition. On Emma's 16th birthday, Sarah gave her a special gift. A small silver locket with Emma's photo inside, but also something else. A tiny GPS tracker, so small it was barely visible. "Mom," Emma said, rolling her eyes. "I'm not a little kid anymore." "I know," Sarah replied. "But I'm still your mother, and I'll always be watching out for you." Emma hugged her tight. "I'm glad," she whispered. "I'm glad you're the kind of mom who pays attention." Sarah held her daughter close, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling the steady beat of her heart. She thought about all the mothers out there, all the children who needed protection, all the predators who counted on parents being too trusting, too busy, too afraid to act. She thought about Marcus Webb, still out there somewhere, and hoped that other mothers would be as vigilant as she'd been, that other children would be as lucky as Emma had been. Because in the end, that's what parenting was about. Not being perfect, not having all the answers, but being present, being aware, being willing to act when something felt wrong, even if you couldn't prove it, even if others thought you were overreacting. The blog's tagline said it all. Trust your instincts. They're usually right. Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it in time. And Emma was safe. This story is based on true events and the experiences of parents worldwide who have had to trust their instincts to protect their children. The names and specific details have been changed to protect privacy, but the warning signs and behaviors described are real. Asterisk. If you suspect someone is targeting your child, document everything. Trust your instincts and don't hesitate to contact law enforcement. Your child's safety is more important than social politeness. Asterisk. Share this story with other parents. Awareness is the first line of defense against predators who count on our trust and complacency. Asterisk. For resources on child safety and recognizing signs of predatory behavior, contact your local law enforcement agency. Asterisk. Remember, perfect neighbor don't exist, but protective parents do. Thank you for reading The Perfect Neighbor. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your location in the comments and let me know how this story made you feel. Did it resonate with your own experiences or spark any thoughts about keeping our kids safe? Your insights could help others stay vigilant too.